Hi, fourth grade. How are you? I hope you are doing well. This is Miss Shields. This is going to be lesson 4 of our lesson on Elisha. In fact, it will be the last one that we have in this chapter 13. Okay, so the last one we had seen that Elisha they were trying to capture, the king of Syria was trying to capture Elisha and had sent some soldiers in to get him. But when his servant looked out the window and was afraid, Elisha wasn't. And then when Elisha prayed and asked God to open the servant's eyes so that he could see what Elisha was seeing, he saw that the entire Syrian army was surrounded by God's army. So Elisha wasn't afraid. In fact, they sent the Syrian army away as giving them a feast and being kind to them. And they went away in peace. Well, that didn't last very long, apparently, because the Syrian army came back. The king sent the Syrian army. I'm in 2 Kings chapter 7, and we'll be in 2 Kings 9. The Syrian army came and surrounded the city again. Now, this time they didn't attack the city. They did something called a siege, or to besiege, which means they basically just sat outside the city gates and wouldn't let any supplies come in, any food, any drink, anything, and they wouldn't let anybody out of the city. And so they just sat out there waiting for the city to starve to death. And that's what happened. Pretty soon the people had nothing. There was very little food, and what food there was too expensive for anybody to afford. So the king was getting very, very upset as he's standing up on the wall looking at the Syrian army, and he decides, you know what, this must be from God. And so therefore, Elisha the prophet is to blame. So today I'm going to kill Elisha, and then maybe we'll get through this. It must be Elisha's fault. So he calls Elisha to him. And Elisha says, no, don't worry about it, because at this time tomorrow, there will be plenty of food. In fact, he says that there'll be, 2 seahs, 1 seah of flour for a single coin. So basically like 50 pounds of flour for a single silver coin. Well, the servant that was helping out, or the officer that was standing with the king next to him, said, oh, that's impossible. If God was to open the windows of heaven, that could never happen. And so Elisha said to him, because you doubted my word and what God could do, you will see it with your eyes, but you won't eat of any of the food. So meanwhile, in another part of the city, there were 4 men who had leprosy, 4 lepers. Now, they weren't allowed to live inside the city because they had leprosy, and leprosy is very contagious. And the Syrians are surely not going to mess with them because they don't want to catch anything. So they just basically sat outside the city gates. And they're sitting there having a conversation with one another, and they say, you know what? If we try to go inside the city, the famine is in the city and we'll die. If we sit here where we are, there's no food and we're going to die. There's only one option that we think might work. And if we go to the Syrians, maybe they might feel sorry for us and give us some food. And if they don't, what's the worst thing that can happen? They'll kill us and we'll die. So we won't be any worse if we go to the Syrians, but we might be in a better position if we do. So they go into the Syrian camp and they look around, and there's horses and there's donkeys and there's tents and there's food cooking on the fire, and there's everything that belongs to the soldiers are still in the tent, but there's no soldiers there. And they're going, this is strange. What in the world happened? What they didn't know was that morning, God had sent a terrible noise through the camp, which sounded like horses and chariots and an enemy army coming. And the soldiers had run for their lives, leaving behind everything, all their gold, all their silver, all their stuff, food still cooking, horses, donkeys, everything that they had. They basically just ran for their lives, but nobody in the city knew it. So here the lepers are enjoying themselves, and they go through the tents and get food and get something to drink and enjoy it. Once they were full, then they started going through the tents and collecting up gold and silver and clothing for themselves and hiding it in different places so they could come back for it. Oh boy, they're going to be so rich. And then they thought better, and they said, you know what? What we're doing is not good. There's people in the city starving to death. We have to share the good news. So they go to the guards at the gate and they explain, hey, we just came from the Syrian camp. No one is there. The stuff is just laying around. Let everybody know inside. So they go and tell the king, and the king is like, well, this could be a trick. There could be, it could be that they are hiding somewhere, and that as soon as we open the door, then they're going to attack us. So he sends a few of his soldiers out to look and make sure. And of course, that officer that was his best buddy, that he said, you're in charge of the gate. You make sure that only the right people come in and out. So his officer was in charge of the gate. The soldiers go out, and sure enough, it's exactly the way the lepers had said. So the people were so excited, and they went out of the city and they started collecting things, and it happened exactly the way Elisha said. By the next morning, by the next day, 50 some pounds of flour you could get for one single coin. Just exactly the way Elisha had said. What about that guy who didn't believe? What about the guy who says, oh, even if God opened the windows of heaven, it couldn't happen? Well, that prophecy came true too, because he was in charge of the gate and was letting people go in and out. The people were so excited to go get the stuff from the Syrian camp that they trampled him. They walked on him, knocked him down, and he died there at the city gate because the people were rushing out to get the stuff. So that prophecy came true too. He did see it with his eyes, but he didn't taste any of it. Well, Elisha had another assignment that he needed to take care of. So he pulled one of his servants aside and he said, I want you to take this oil in your hand, and I want you to run to a place where the soldiers are. I want you to go find Jehu. Okay, Jehu was one of the soldiers. Pull him aside in private and pour oil on his head and tell him, God has made you the king over Israel. Then you run away from where he is. So the servant did exactly that. He took the oil and he found Jehu, pulled him aside away from the soldiers, and poured oil on his head and said, you are the king, and God has given you a job to do. God has pronounced judgment on Ahab's family. So that is your job, is you are to destroy the house of Ahab. You are to destroy Jezebel, because that was God's punishment for that family. So, and the servant went and ran. Well, the other soldiers found out, and they said, oh yes, Jehu is king. Jehu is king. So Jehu got in his chariot and he went to the city where King Joram, the king of Israel, was. Now, Joram was one of Ahab's sons. Ahab actually had quite a few sons. He had about 70 or more in the Bible. So there was quite a little job to do. So he goes to the city where King Joram and Queen Jezebel are all in the same city, and he comes riding on his chariot. And one of the guards up on top of the wall lets the king know, hey, there's a rider coming. And the king says, well, go send a messenger out and find out what he's here for. And so the messenger comes running out, and he says, the king wants to know, are you here for peace? And Jehu says, what have you to do with peace? Turn around, you follow me. So the messenger turns around, gets in line behind Jehu, and the two of them are continue to ride toward the city. Well, the messenger, the guy up on top of the wall says, well, I sent the messenger, but he didn't come back. The king says, send another one. So he sent a second messenger out to Jehu. And again, the king wants to know, are you here for peace? And Jehu says, what have you to do with peace? You get in behind me. You follow me. So the soldier swings around, and now there's three of them riding toward the city. So the king says, well, what's going on here? And the guy on the wall says, well, I think that's Jehu out there. But the other messengers didn't come back and tell me anything. So the king got ready his chariot to ride out to see what Jehu wanted. And he rides out there and he says, Jehu, is at peace? And Jehu says, how can there be peace when you are doing these awful, horrible, sinful things, you and the other people that are around you? So King Joram, Ahab's son, the king, figures out Jehu's not there for peace, and he begins to ride away. Well, it doesn't do any good. Jehu kills King Joram. Then Jehu sends messengers to the cities where Ahab's other sons are killed, are living, and tells the leaders of those cities to kill all of Ahab's sons. So all of Ahab's sons are killed in the city. And then he rides into the city and to take care of the last job, which is Queen Jezebel. Queen Jezebel was under God's punishment too. So Queen Jezebel puts on her little eye makeup and all her fancy stuff, and she looks out the window at Jehu and looks down at him through the window and kind of says some snotty things to him. And Jehu looks up at the window and he says, who is on my side? And two men looked out the window, and he said to the men, throw her out the window. So they threw her out the window, and it says her blood splattered on the wall, and it was a big mess. And Jehu went inside to eat, and then he says, okay, you know what? She was a king's daughter. We should give her a decent burial. They go out there to give her a decent burial. The body is gone. Okay, and that's exactly what Elijah, the prophet, had said, that the dogs would eat Jezebel. There wouldn't be a body to even bury. So Jehu had wiped out the entire family of Ahab, just as God had said. But Jehu wasn't quite finished yet, because Jehu also wanted to get rid of all the Baal worship that was there. So he wanted to completely wipe out Baal worship. Remember, Baal worship had come in with Jezebel. So Jehu sends a message around and he says, let's go ahead and have a big feast, and we're going to all celebrate Baal together. So he says, Ahab served Baal just a little bit. Jehu is going to serve him a lot. So he pretended to be a Baal worshiper, and he announced a big Baal sacrifice in the temple. And he invited all the priests and all the prophets and all the people who wanted to worship Baal to come into this big temple together to worship Baal. But it was a trick. He really wasn't planning on worshiping Baal there. And they brought all the people came in and filled the temple. And Jehu sent one of his servants around and said, now you look around and make sure there's no servants of the Lord in here, only worshipers of Baal. So they went to offer the sacrifices, and Jehu had set some men up outside, and they said, when I give the signal, you guys come in here and kill all the prophets, all the priests, all the Baal worshipers that are in this palace, in the temple. And that's exactly what they did. So Jehu wiped out, completely destroyed Baal worship in Israel, which would have been a great thing. But unfortunately, at the end of 2 Kings chapter 9, it says, but Jehu did not turn away from idol worship. There was still a couple of idols that he wanted to worship. There were still 2 golden calves that had been set up by Jeroboam at the very beginning, and Jehu still wanted to worship those. So the Lord said to Jehu, you have done well. You have done what is right in my eyes. He went ahead and obeyed God and got rid of the Baal worship and Ahab's family. And he says, because you have done that, your sons will sit on the throne of Israel for 4 generations, which if we know anything about the kings of Israel, that's a big deal to get 4 kings in a row in the same family. But Jehu did not listen to God. He did not turn away from the Baal, from the worship of these golden calves. He did not serve God with all his heart. God would have blessed him even more had he done that. All right, so that is the end of chapter 13. You should have your chapter 13 notes. You will need them because you have a chapter 13 test coming up. You are allowed to use your notes. So in the meantime, go back and reread 2 Kings 6 about the servant seeing the fiery army, and then you can go ahead and do your worksheet for today. And I will see you the next time. Bye-bye.